Welcome to the LDN radio show, brought to you by the LDN Research Trust. I'm your host, Linda Elsiegood. I have an exciting lineup of guest speakers who are LDN experts in their field. We will be discussing low-dose Naltrexone and its many uses in autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc. You're invited to join us on air, asking your questions by calling in on the local rate phone numbers in the UK and the US, which can be found on ldnradio.org. Thank you for joining us. Today we're joined by Jill Brook, who's a nutritionist and researcher. Jill also suffers with severe POTS and MCAD and takes LDN. She's one of the research advisors to the LDN Research Trust. And she had a birthday yesterday, but I won't tell you how old she is. This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. So thank you for joining us, Jill.
Thank you for having me.
So could you explain what it is we should be doing diet-wise, nutrition-wise, which will help the LDN work properly?
Sure thing. So as you know, there's not a lot of research on LDN yet, and that's the whole reason that you and the LDN Research Trust exist. But there are a lot of doctors who are very experienced with LDN who have told us that LDN works better when you completely avoid gluten in your diet, when you avoid dairy, and when you avoid all your personal allergens and food triggers. And that requires doing an elimination diet to probably figure out what those are, but it's worth it because once you do and avoid them, your LDN can work better. There's also some thinking that LDN works better when you are vitamin D replete, which means you have enough of it. And there's some debate as to what that means, to have enough vitamin D. But the head of Harvard Nutrition says 75 nanomoles per liter in your blood. And so, we could take that as a starting point. So basically, those things, if you do those, your LDN should theoretically work better.
What diet should people be following? I know there are so many people out there who get completely confused. There are so many conflicting diets.
Yeah, it is overwhelming, the number of different diets out there and the amount of different advice. And so what I like to do is to take in all of it and look at how much of it agrees. So to a large extent, all the differing advice does agree on a whole lot of things. And so we can start there. So they all agree that we should remove inflammatory foods. And inflammatory foods for everybody include gluten, sugar, anything else that's high glycemic, which means it raises your blood sugar a whole lot. So even fresh fruit juice goes in that category. Anything that's fried or that has trans fats is going to raise inflammation. Anything that gets your ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids higher is going to cause inflammation. So that means things like processed cooking oils like corn oil or canola oil will do it. Processed meats of any kind, any cheap meat certainly raises inflammation. And there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that eating meat at all can raise inflammation. And we can talk about that because that's one of the more controversial subjects, whether you ought to go vegetarian or vegan or not. But certainly the cheap meat and the processed meat is going to raise inflammation. And then pretty much any added chemicals have a good chance of raising inflammation. And even some additives that are natural. For example, carrageenan is an additive that you find in a lot of dairy products or non-dairy milks. And even though it's made from seaweed, it appears to cause gut inflammation. So avoiding those things is sort of number one. Number two, I mentioned already, which is to figure out what are your own unique triggers by doing an elimination diet. And some of the most common things would be dairy, nuts, shellfish, soy, peanuts, corn, or nightshade vegetables, which are like the tomatoes, the bell peppers, eggplant, chili peppers, goji berries. And not very many people are allergic or have issues with any one of those things, but as people who struggle with autoimmune disorders, we are the people who are probably going to have a higher rate of having some of those triggers. So figuring those out is number one, so you can get that inflammation down. And then number two is more fun because it's all the things that you do get to eat, and that's the things that reduce inflammation. And incidentally, research shows that you'll be happier on your diet if you think more about what you should eat than what you shouldn't eat. So that would be basically all the colorful plants, the fruits, the vegetables especially, and as much variety as possible. So not just variety in colors, you know, they always say eat the rainbow, but also variety in parts of the plant, whether it's the roots or the leaves or the shoots or the flower, getting in just as much as possible. Other plant foods would be things like nuts. And some people would say that you want to soak those or sprout those first to make them even healthier. Certainly green tea, white tea, red tea, other kinds of tea are anti-inflammatory, as well as lots of herbs and spices. Probably everyone's heard about the turmeric and the ginger, but cloves and rosemary have also been shown to have really high anti-inflammatory properties, as does garlic, if you can handle it. Other anti-inflammatory foods are ones that have lots of omega-3 fatty acids. So that would be the oily fish, like the Alaska salmon. Unfortunately, fish is getting more polluted as we pollute our oceans more. So that's another one where I feel a little bit conflicted. But Alaska salmon seems to be the choice among experts if you want a reliably clean fish with a good omega-3 profile. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the last thing is you want to eat foods that make your microbiome happy. And I'm guessing our listeners all know by now that the microbiome is like the trillion other cells that live on you besides your own body cells. It's all the organisms, the bacteria and whatnot that live in your mouth and in your gut and in your armpits and all over. And we've been ignoring them for a long time. We didn't realize that they did so many important things for us. They help us digest food, they make vitamins, they help keep our immune system working properly, they inhibit the growth of pathogens, and when we treat them right, they will do all kinds of good things for us, but when we treat them wrong and they get out of balance, then all kinds of bad things happen. So eating the foods and having the habits that keep the microbiome happy, I think is kind of the next frontier for a lot of research. And so that would involve doing things like eating probiotic foods that have the healthy bacteria in them, like fermented vegetables such as sauerkraut or kimchi. Yogurt is fermented. If you want to avoid dairy, there's non-dairy yogurts made from like almond milk or coconut milk. Kombucha is a drink that is very yummy and has those probiotics in it. You can also eat prebiotic foods, which are the foods, the fibers that the healthy bacteria need to thrive and grow on. And so if you Google those, you'll find a long list. My favorites are avocado, jicama, dandelion greens, but there's a bunch more. And then things that make your microbiome get out of balance are things we kind of already knew. Eating too much sugar, eating too many processed carbohydrates, and eating fake foods, for example, fake sweeteners, for example. They finally figured out why eating fake sweeteners and diet soda didn't make people lose weight, and it was through their effect on the gut. So that's a really long answer as to kind of what are the things that are universally agreed upon that you can do to eat to help manage an autoimmune disorder. There's a lot of other things that have less evidence and that are maybe more debatable or not. And I'm all for doing a lot of self-experiments if they intrigue you. But I think that these are the things that everyone can agree on.
I'm sure there are people out there who are thinking, my diet is really bad. And you talked about an elimination diet. How would somebody who has never looked at their diet before go about looking to eliminate foods?
So the easiest way to do an elimination diet, and I should say it's not easy. I think an elimination diet, honestly, might be one of the more challenging things you do because it's just such a monumental hassle. But the best way to do it is to spend some time getting ready, set aside a few weeks where you are just going to eat some very simple few foods that you know you feel good on. And I find that for some people, it'll be something like chicken and broccoli and brown rice. Different people have different foods that work for them. But you start out very, very simple, and you do that for a couple of weeks so that you get everything else out of your system. And it's hard because obviously real life is going to bring along temptations and whatnot. But the more you can do it, the more it will pay off forevermore. Because after you do that, you kind of have a clean slate, and you can add in one food at a time for a few days at a time. And you want to start with just a little, that first morning when you decide you're going to try, maybe it's tomatoes, whatever food it is, try just a little bit. If you feel okay, a few hours later, you're going to have a few more bites. If you still feel okay, a few hours later, eat, maybe a cup, see how you feel for the next 2 days. And if you feel fine, now tomatoes are on the list and you can add those in. If you don't feel fine, then you know that those are off. And you keep doing that with all the different foods that you're wondering about until you have a pretty good idea of what is safe and what is triggering you to not feel so good. And yes, it's laborious. It's a huge pain in the neck, and it's worth it though.
And what about the blood tests?
I'm a big fan of... Oh, I'm sorry?
And what about the blood tests you can have that can show what foods you should avoid?
So there are lots of blood tests out there, but according to the research, none of them are very reliable. So you could certainly try them, and you could certainly see if they help you, but on average, most are not found to correlate very highly with the symptoms that people feel, unfortunately. Because that would be so nice if you could just take one test and be done with it.
Yes, that just sounds too simple, doesn't it? But I do like the idea of the fresh start and introducing one food at a time. That way, you know for sure whether you can eat that food or not. So I think that is a really good idea. So what I would like to do now is to tell people if they would like to call in. We're going to have a break in a moment, but if you would like to start to take your calls, any dietary questions, nutrition that you would like to ask Jill, the numbers to call in on, there are local rate numbers in England and America. You go to, if you just put in your browser, ldnradio.org, the numbers will be there, and we'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. Thank you. The LDN Health Tracker app, called My LDN, is available free for Androids, iPhones, Macs, PCs, iPads and notebooks. The app allows you to keep track of all your medications, pain levels, sleep, quality of life, etc. You can print out graphs and charts to take to your doctor. Full details on the LDN Research Trust website. You can keep a journal so you won't ever forget anything again, and set alarms. The app is free and all your information is held securely and anonymously. By using the app, you'll be taking part in the world's largest LDN survey, anonymously. Any questions, please email me, linda@ldnrt.org. This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Okay, welcome back, Jill. Been thinking about what you were saying. Now, how does willpower come into this? It's not going to be easy to follow healthy eating. What does research show?
Yeah, that is a really good point because, the research shows that the hard part isn't so much knowing what to do, it's the doing it consistently day in and day out. And so interestingly, what the research says about willpower is whenever possible, don't rely on it. Because willpower is a fair weather friend, and it's absolutely proven that willpower will fail you more often when you are tired, hungry, if you have low blood pressure, low blood sugar, if you are distracted. And so there's all kinds of situations where it'll fall through. So instead, the best advice is to rely on several other things. For example, environmental engineering. There's all kinds of really fun research about how small changes in your environment can have a huge impact on your eating habits. And if anyone's interested in a lot of fun and funny research, check out Brian Wansink at the Cornell University Department of Nutrition. And what he finds, for example, is if you put a candy jar 3 feet away from someone versus 6 feet away from someone, you can impact how much candy they eat by some huge amount, something like 30%, just because they have to reach a little further. He's done studies where he'll put a barrier in between you and the candy jar, so it's just a little bit harder to reach. Or he'll use an opaque candy jar instead of a translucent candy jar so that you can't see the candy. And that will cut down on snacking by a whole lot, just because you can't see it. And so what they find is just having a little bit of tempting junky food in your environment will make you eat more of it. And even if it doesn't make you eat more of it, it'll drain your willpower so that you'll have worse eating habits later on. So the first thing you can do is just go through your kitchen, your home, your car, your office, and basically do nutritional feng shui. Get the healthy stuff where you can see it and get at it more easily. Put the unhealthy stuff where it's a little bit harder to get, and that'll have a really big impact. Another big piece of advice is to use the people around you. So, for example, they find that just spending time with like-minded people, people who eat healthier, has a huge impact on your habits. They find that your weight is largely influenced by the weight of the people that you spend time with and the people that they spend time with. There's an interesting network effect. They also find that if you are to talk about your goals out loud to other people, you're more likely to meet them. And if you make friendly bets with people, that you're more likely to stick to them and have fun doing it. So I'm a big fan of, just teasing people and saying, hey, I bet you, I'll eat fewer cookies than you will at this holiday party. And just by making a friendly bet, you get a really big change in behavior, the research suggests. Another thing you can do is harness the power of routines, because probably everyone's familiar with how on that first day that you drive to a new job, it is a lot of work and you have to think about your driving route. But once you've done it the same time, the same way every day, it gets so automatic that you don't even think about it. And the same is definitely true for eating. So if you get in the habit of grocery shopping at the same time in the same place, and maybe you always start with the produce section, that'll become routine, and you're likely to stop even thinking about those aisles at the grocery store that contain all the junky stuff. If you get in the habit of doing the same few breakfasts day in and day out, you'll stop even wanting the pastries because you're not thinking anymore. You're just in your set routine of doing the healthy stuff. So those can be some things people do. Other things are to find non-edible rewards, because a lot of the times that we're eating junky food, we're doing it to relax or to celebrate or to feel good or to relieve some tension or loneliness. And if you have a good list of non-edible things that'll give you the same reward, it can be very helpful. And then one of my favorite ones, they call it making a Ulysses contract. And that's where, in a moment of good willpower, you basically make a deal that makes it impossible for you to have bad willpower at the moment when you're at your weakest. So, for example, if you're in a moment of good willpower, maybe you walk into a party and you tell the hostess that you can't have dessert because you're having a blood test in the morning. Well, what are you going to do now, right? You're stuck. You're not going to have dessert no matter how bad you want it, because then you'll be caught lying. And so that's kind of a whole category of things that they will say, because the researchers who study willpower will be the first to tell you not to rely on it.
Okay. Well, we've got a caller next, and his name's Ed, and he wanted to ask about sugar alternatives. So that's a very good question. Hello, Ed. Are you there?
Hi. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking my call. So I have arthritis, and I'm attempting to kick the sugar habit with moderate success, not a whole lot of success, to be honest. So I'm wondering if there's any tricks that I can employ to help me do that, including artificial sweeteners. Is that something that I should consider, and is it the type of thing that might help me kick the sugar habit? Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that is a really great question, because unfortunately most of us were, raised on some amount of sugar, and it's being proven to be truly addictive. And so that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. And so the first question about using fake sweeteners. In the past, there have been some nutritionists who have said, go ahead and use fake sweeteners as a bridge to getting off of sweeteners, because it'll train your brain to not associate good energy with the sweet taste. But now they're changing their mind on that, because the latest findings about fake sweeteners are all bad. I mean, they're terrible. Actually, it's a pretty high priority to get fake sweeteners out of your diet, because most of them do bad things to the microbiome, and they do bad things to your brain. So, for example, NutraSweet is one where it is thought to be so unbelievably sweet, sweeter than sugar, that it actually can mess with your neurotransmitters and make it so that that brief high you get from it is so high that when you come down from it, you're at a lower baseline. So there's some thinking that that doing some of those fake sweeteners sets you up for mood disorders or struggling with, maybe a tendency toward more depression. And that getting off of them can be very helpful. The good news about getting off them also is that your microbiome tends to recover within a couple of weeks of getting off of them. So that's the bad news about fake sweeteners. But the good news is there are some good tricks for giving up sugar. For example, anything that helps you balance your blood sugar more helps. So getting more sleep and eating a healthier diet, lowering stress. They find that people who drink more coffee are more successful at giving up sugar. But by far the biggest thing I can recommend is to get to know your taste buds and really pamper them. And this, if people take away anything, this would be the thing that I would remember from this, is that your taste buds only live for about 4 weeks, and then they die and new ones grow back. So it's like hair. And those new fresh taste buds, those virgin taste buds that have never sensed anything before, they are super sensitive. So they think that a pecan is super sweet. They think that celery is very salty. And, if they were to taste an Oreo cookie, it would be downright painful to them. But with repeated exposure to over-flavored things and very sweet or very salty things, they basically get blitzed. They get desensitized. And so for the rest of their short life of 4 weeks, you don't get as much flavor out of that taste bud. So the upshot is that if you can go a couple weeks resisting over-flavored processed foods, now you're developing more and more of these fresh virgin taste buds who just get a lot more sensation out of everything. So now you eat a raw almond and it tastes like a creamy, sweet, beautiful explosion in your mouth. And, something like a brownie would just hurt. It wouldn't even be good anymore. And so you can play with this. You can see for yourself. And you'll even notice, for example, that overnight your taste buds get more sensitive. So if you have pizza at night and then you eat the leftovers in the morning, a lot of people think it tastes better, right? Well, that's your taste buds getting more sensitive. And so keeping that in mind helps a lot of people. And a few easy things you can do to help your taste buds get more sensitive is to get rid of things that blitz them with no benefit. So, for example, a lot of toothpastes are over-flavored, and if you just switch to a more natural one, then you won't start your day by blitzing your taste buds. Same thing with mouthwash. Now, mouthwash probably isn't a great idea anyway because we talked about those healthy bacteria in your mouth. But, if you start your day brushing your teeth and then blitzing your taste buds with mouthwash, then, of course, by the time you hit breakfast, an apple tastes like nothing. And in order to get any flavor, you need something, like a pastry or a Pop-Tart. And so pampering those taste buds will, I think, be the ultimate answer because then you don't even like sugar. And when you do crave something a little bit sweet, then something natural, an apple will more than do it because you'll be getting way more flavor than you're even getting now. So I hope that's the best that I know of. That's where I've seen people have the most success.
Can I just ask a quick question? I've eliminated sugar from my diet, but I've been eating coconut sugar. Is coconut sugar a no-no as well, or is that okay?
That's a good question. I haven't seen any research on that, but my guess is that it's probably more natural. I believe it's lower glycemic, and so I think that is a better alternative. But in the end, it's not as good as eating, real, actual, fresh coconuts. But it's probably certainly better. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is sort of the lifelong. None of us are perfect. I'm not perfect either. My evil thing is, liking a little stevia here and there. And it's tough because the sweet flavor is the one that's proven, it's in your biology. That sweet flavor is the one that makes a baby stop crying and smile. So we're up against a pretty tough biological instinct there. So what we can do is just keep fighting our best fight.
Does that answer your question, Ed?
Yes, it does. Thanks a lot. That was really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll go to our next caller now, and it's Amy. And Amy wants to know how she can lose weight when she can't exercise. Hello, Amy?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'm having a hard time losing weight since I can't exercise as much as I used to. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, that's one that we hear a lot, and I know it's really frustrating not to be able to exercise, but the good news is there's still a lot of things you can do to manage your weight. I mean, I think actually the worst part about not being able to exercise is just that it affects your mood and your sleep. But in my experience, you can still lose weight just fine. In fact, experts estimate that weight loss is 85% diet and only 15% exercise, so you aren't missing that much. And in fact, there was even a study recently, you probably saw it, where they gave people Fitbits so that they could measure how much exercise they were getting. And the people who did get the Fitbits and who got little, chimes telling them when they had reached their 10,000 steps for the day, they had worse weight loss results than people who did not get a Fitbit. And they think it's because the people who were exercising kind of felt justified in having more little treats here and there. So sometimes I think, at least in my experience, I've worked with, for example, a lot of injured athletes who are very worried that they're going to gain weight when they stop exercising. In my experience, actually, the opposite happens because you can't use exercise as a fallback. So with that said, things that you can do are, first of all, just be really careful to avoid any blood sugar spikes, because when your blood sugar spikes, that's when your insulin gets released, and that kind of signals your body to put all the extra calories into the blood cells. So avoiding sugary treats and processed carbs is one. But other things that'll reduce blood sugar spikes is reducing stress, getting enough sleep, eating meals that have some protein and fiber and healthy fats in them, filling up on vegetables. You pretty much will never spike your blood sugar eating as many vegetables as you want. The next thing you can do is maximize your metabolism. I know it's probably frustrating not to be able to exercise and get your metabolism up that way, but actually just eating unprocessed foods is thought to raise your metabolism by about 15%, which is a lot. So, just going for those same foods that we talked about for the anti-inflammatory effect. And so you kind of can kill two birds with one stone there. Of course, alcohol is a depressant that lowers your metabolism, so as much as you can avoid that, it's great. I've had some clients who have done really well with laughter yoga, and they find that they think that really helps to make them feel like their metabolism is getting boosted. So if that's anything that interests you, you could look up what that is, but that's a fun way to kind of get lots of the benefits of exercise if you can't actually move your joints that much. And then one other thing in the category of maximizing metabolism is I would talk to your doctor or a physical therapist and see if there is some sort of exercise they might be able to figure out that you could do. For example, maybe it's isometric, which means you're not even moving. You're just, for example, holding a weight, but not lifting it up and down, just holding it in place. Because there's you've got something like 600 or 800 different muscles in your body, and a good therapist might be able to figure out some that you could safely use to get some exercise. Other things you can do, anything that makes you eat slower, makes you eat less without even realizing it and without even trying, just because it gives you more time to feel satisfied. So, for example, studies have shown that dimming the lighting and putting on relaxing music during dinner helps people to eat more slowly. There's also a lot of research showing that people tend to feel hungry when they're actually dehydrated or thirsty. So you could try satisfying your thirst first sometimes and see if maybe you're not hungry as often as you think. Other things you could do, they've shown that lowering your thermostat can help you lose a little bit of weight, just because your body has to work a tad bit harder to stay warm. Although you don't want to do it too far, because if you're freezing, then that tends to make you extra hungry, but a little bit lower thermostat. And then the last thing I'd say is just be okay with slow results, because if you are not exercising and you lose weight quickly, you're at risk for losing a lot of muscle instead of fat. And so just remember that even when you lose a quarter pound of fat, the scale doesn't look like it's changed very much, but that's a whole stick of butter off of your body. And so slow and easy is the way to go. And so those would be my top tips. And in my experience, I think you'll get fine results, so I wouldn't be too scared of not being able to exercise.
Well, I think you've given Amy some really good advice there, and especially with what you were saying earlier about sugar and elimination diet. So are you going to give it a go, Amy?
I am. So many things I hadn't even thought of. So interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, Jill, that people have emailed in. And one lady was saying she was wondering if she could take other supplements at the same time as LDN, specifically probiotics. And I know that's what you were talking about a little while ago. Is it okay to take those at the same time as LDN?
Again, I haven't seen specific studies on this, but I know tons and tons of people who do, and I have never heard of any issues with it. And so, I guess I would say when it comes to a drug, you want to check with your doctor, but I have never heard of anyone having any problem with that.
Mm-hmm. And we have another one from Sarah, and she says she has MS, and she's found that when she takes B-complex vitamin, she doesn't sleep very well. She wants to know if she should have that investigated further because she feels that vitamin B-complex is one she should be taking with MS.
So the first thing that comes to mind is that B-complex vitamins are, known for giving people more energy. And so I wonder if not being able to sleep might partially be related to having better energy. However, given that you have MS, I would say anytime, you notice something is off and not getting better, I'd be on the safe side and ask your doctor about it.
Mm-hmm. She also says she's been on a 30-day elimination diet and she found she was allergic to dairy, but no issues with eggs or gluten. And she's saying, would you still recommend avoiding the eggs and gluten, even though she's not allergic to it?
So, first of all, bravo on making it through a 30-day elimination diet. That's not easy. I would say gluten, I would definitely avoid gluten, and I would avoid it forever, and I would avoid it entirely. A lot of people don't realize that having a little bit of gluten here and there is pretty much just as bad as having a bunch all the time. And the research, it used to be that everyone who thought they felt worse on gluten, they would make fun of us. They'd say, that can't be. You're just, being high maintenance. There's nothing to it. But the research coming out is showing that the patients were right. Even people who don't have celiac do have inflammatory reactions to gluten. And Dr. Tom O'Brien gave an amazing lecture about this at the LDN conference this past year. So if anybody is in doubt about this, if you're saying, I love my toast, I don't think I can give it up, I would recommend that you watch his talk, because after watching that, after seeing pictures of people's guts with and without gluten, after he produced something like 40 different top-notch studies, I would definitely say get rid of gluten forever and don't look back. As for eggs, that one is a little bit more, I would say, controversial. And so if eggs work for you, then having eggs here and there might be a good idea. However, there are two doctors who have done a lot of research on MS. And Linda, I don't know if you might know these guys. You're such a big deal in the MS world. But Roy Swank is no longer alive, but then his student, John McDougall, took over his research. Mm-hmm. And they did a lot of amazing research on MS and diet. And I just love how they came across it. So Roy Swank was traveling in Norway, it's my understanding, and what he noticed is that Norwegians on the coast had something like only 1/6 the rate of MS as Norwegians inland. And he was trying to figure out why that was. And he determined that it was probably their diets, that on the coast they were eating more fish, and inland they were eating more meat and dairy. And so he pursued that line of research for 50 years and pretty much determined that saturated fat intake might be related to much, much worse outcomes in MS. He followed his people for 50 years, and patients who were able to limit their saturated fat intake to, I believe it was under 20 grams a day or maybe under 17 grams a day, they literally showed no further deterioration. And just to put that into context, so they were eating, I can't remember if it was 17 or 20 or fewer grams saturated fat a day, but the average American eats 125 grams per day.
Wow.
So this was a very low saturated fat diet. And not all of them maintained it. And unfortunately, the ones who did not maintain it, they did deteriorate much faster. And, there's a statistic that remains in my mind. It was the difference between having 17 or fewer grams per day or having 25 grams or more, and it tripled the mortality rate over the course of its study. And so that's why when you mention eggs, the first thing that goes through my mind is, okay, 1 egg equals about 2 grams of saturated fat, and you probably want to just be really careful about how much you have. That said, you could do eggs and still remain under the 17 grams per day. But I recommend, look up John McDougall and look at what he says about MS and diet, because he's looked into it far more than anyone else. I have to say, one other study that remains in my mind that was just absolutely fascinating with these guys is that they compared the rates of MS in wealthier countries versus poorer countries. And basically in poorer countries, they were eating a lot of plant-based diets, whereas in the wealthier countries, they were doing a lot more meat and dairy. And the country of Japan, though, was sort of an outlier, and it was useful for the study because in Japan, they were a wealthy country, but they eat more like a poor country. And so they eat a lot of, plants and grains and seafood, but not really much dairy or meat. And what they found was that in Japan, the rate of MS was quite low, like in the poor countries. And so I find those demographic studies to be really compelling myself. And so that would be one reason to watch the egg. So I'm sorry, that was a really long answer. But,
That's fine. I'm learning so much. It's fantastic. And I should know a bit more about it than I do. I'm ashamed of myself. Well, we'll just go into another break. So if anybody wants to call in with some more questions or email some more questions through, we'll be back in 2 minutes. The LDN Research Trust was established as a registered charity in 2004 in the UK. We have members in most countries around the world, with approximately 52% in the US. Our aim is to spread awareness of LDN in hope that one day it will be prescribed as a first-line treatment. We have our mailing list, website, forum, Vimeo channel, Facebook pages and groups, Twitter, LinkedIn, newsletters, conferences, LDN documentaries, the LDN app, the LDN book, and now the LDN radio show. We're supported by a team of LDN experts who are our medical and pharmacological advisors. The charity relies totally on donations and is operated by volunteers. We hope for an LDN and MS trial soon, and we help and support doctors and researchers who are planning trials. Please visit our website. This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Welcome back, Jill. I feel hungry now. Talking about food.
Oh, no. Right.
So, would you like to reply to one of the questions that have been sent to you next?
Sure. Let's see. Elaine asked, could digestive issues such as inflammation, leaky gut, etc., cause someone to have low sodium or potassium and vitamins, and how would one improve this? So we didn't talk about leaky gut, but that would be a whole nother interesting thing. But in my experience, when you have low sodium and potassium, at least in my training, that means that something is making fluids not stay in use. So something like excessive sweating or vomiting or diarrhea or diuretics or laxatives or just malnourishment or extreme dieting. Because usually if you're eating a pretty normal diet and you have good kidneys, they will do a really good job of regulating sodium and potassium. And so if you think you're, not having any of these issues and you're eating normally, I would just check with your doctor. As far as having vitamins, if you feel like you're eating vitamins and they're not getting absorbed, I would talk to your GI doctor because I don't think that inflammation on its own or leaky gut would be the cause.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What, me included in this, what are some easy things people can do to start eating healthier?
Yeah, so easy things you can do. I would say number one is sign up for some free nutrition newsletters, because there's some research showing that when you get these free newsletters in your email every week, it just keeps you thinking more about it, and it keeps it salient, and it keeps you motivated. And so my very favorite one is at nutritionfacts.org. And Dr. Greger there puts together some amazing videos that will absolutely keep you motivated and inspired to eat healthy. Other places that have free newsletters are the Mayo Clinic, the Berkeley Wellness letter, Harvard Nutrition letter, Tufts University Nutrition letter. There's just a bunch all over. If you Google free nutrition letters, look for the names you recognize and trust, and that's one proven way to stay inspired. Another thing I would say that you can do, there's a lot of easy things you can do that remove chemicals that you don't need from your diet. So, for example, next time you're getting new pans, replace your Teflon-coated nonstick pans with different kinds of pans with safer, healthier coatings. Like there's one called the Scan Pan or Le Creuset, or good old cast iron works great. And removing those chemicals will make you healthier, along with just being more careful not to eat plastic. There's been some pretty alarming studies about how much plastic is in everybody's system and how much it can mess with our systems. So just making sure that you never, ever heat up food in plastic. Try to avoid drinking water out of soft plastic water bottles, especially if they've been in the sun or heated up. Try not to drink hot beverages in plastic cups. Maybe bring your own cup to the coffee shop. And, even when possible, if you can, choose foods from the bulk aisle instead of getting canned beans, because the lining of the cans has some plastic in it. Simple things like instead of drinking hot water straight from the tap, you can run it cold and then heat it up afterwards, because your pipes will have metals and things that dissolve in the hot water. If you can afford it, eating organic food is a way to nicely avoid all kinds of chemicals and pesticides. And that would be some easy things you can do. Do you want me to keep going? I could go on all day.
Well, we had a caller. Well, it's very interesting. We had a caller who wanted to ask you a question, but she didn't want to say it online. So we have the question here that I can read out to you, if I can get it to stay in the right place. Okay. Okay. She has mast cell activation and autoimmune issues. She says, do you have any diet suggestions or information from your own experience that would help her?
Yeah, so mast cell activation disorder is its own big, confusing thing. But my quick description of it is that your mast cells are too quickly releasing their nasty chemicals, which include histamines and a whole bunch of other bad things, and causing all kinds of allergic reactions, and it can happen in any tissue, and it can be mild, or it can be so severe that some people are in anaphylaxis all the time. And so a low histamine diet is what has been found probably most helpful for those people. And it's kind of complicated, but different foods can have more or less histamines, and by avoiding eating them, you can keep your histamine load lower and avoid more of those reactions. The worst offenders are any protein that have gotten old, so basically old meat. So, beef jerky or sausage or bologna or sandwich meat that has been dead for a long time. Those things have a ton of histamines in them. If you go online, you can find lists of foods and histamines, and the problem is that they don't all agree because there's a lot of factors that can influence histamines. In addition, there are foods that are called histamine liberators, and those are foods that tend to make your mast cells degranulate and release their chemicals, and so avoiding those can be helpful. It's another diet that takes a lot of trial and error to see what works for you. My own, I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll just say that I've found that what works for me is to go almost vegan, because when you avoid the animal foods, you can really avoid a lot of the histamines. And it's a little bit sad because some of the healthiest foods can be very high in histamine. For example, seafood develops histamines very quickly after it's dead. So unless you can go fishing and eat the fish right there and then, you're probably going to be getting a lot of histamines. So for me, going vegan, it pretty much is what has helped me the most. And then in order to get those omega-3 fats to make up for being vegan, I do take a supplement for those. So that would be my big recommendations. Mm-hmm. But you know what? Anyone's welcome to email me. I'm Jill@dietforhealth.com, and I can probably send them a lot more information about the low histamine diet or other things that they're interested in.
That's wonderful. And we will have you back, Jill, on another show. The feedback we're getting coming in is amazing. One question people would like to ask, we're coming up to the holiday season for those people that celebrate Christmas. How do you manage, I know you gave one tip earlier, to go out and eat out and go to parties and not eat gluten? So you're not the guest from hell, you know.
I used to spend a lot of time worrying about this and wanting to be so polite and wanting to not offend anyone. And I would say, first of all, you know what? Give it time, and everyone on the planet will be gluten. They're going to learn about gluten, and sooner or later, they're going to be happy that you turned them on to the fact that gluten wasn't good. So I would say be gluten-free, be proud, don't feel bad that you've got to do what you've got to do. Again, getting back to Dr. Tom O'Brien's talk at the LDN conference 2016, it was just amazing, because one of the things that it said was after you eat gluten, you're probably going to pay a price for months afterwards, because the antibodies that you make in response to gluten are going to float around in your system doing damage for a long time. So, so eating a few bites of this or that just to get some, to just get your holiday jollies or to make the hostess happy, in my opinion, isn't worth it. So that's that. So what can you do? I'm a big fan of, bringing my own food, as a gift to the hostess. So, bring your own dish of something to pass around that you can eat. Making friends with people who are also gluten-free. One of the reasons why the research shows that your eating habits are so affected by the people around you is exactly for reasons like this, because it is tough. It's really tough. So the people that I've seen be most successful with it, they kind of just have fun with it, or even get silly with it. Maybe they throw their own gluten-free holiday party, or just basically make it known that they don't do gluten. They're not gonna, they're not sorry, and turn it into kind of a joke. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry I don't have any magic ideas there. I do have a number of clients who have decided that instead of making cookies for Christmas, they're going to get into making really good soups and stews and things like that. Yeah, I have a feeling that the next generation, no one's going to worry about this, but for right now, we're sort of the ones having to forge the way. So if anybody has other great ideas, I'd love to hear them. Maybe they can send them our way.
What about alcoholic drinks? What can you drink that is gluten-free?
That is a great question. And the answer is you wanna see gluten-free on the label if it's beer, and there are some gluten-free beers. And my husband tells me that they're okay. I'm not into beer myself. And so, so there's a whole bunch of those. The worry about other drinks that don't get made with grains is the cross-contamination. And so it all has to do with what was made at the same factory that was handling the grains that had gluten. And so I would look for things that say gluten-free on the label, or I would get confirmation like from the company website before assuming that anything is safe. Typically the tequilas tend to be very safe because they're not made anywhere near anything that was made with gluten. But for example, if you want to go for like wine or vodka or other kinds of spirits, I would just do a little research and verify that it was made in a facility that didn't have gluten in there.
Mm. Well, that's some very good tips there. So, bad habits. What bad habits do you have, Jill? Dietary bad habits.
Dietary bad. Oh, good. I'm glad you narrowed that down. I honestly, I get hooked and obsessed with things very easily. And so, to the extent that variety is hugely important in a diet, my problem is that, for example, I will hear about how healthy sprouted walnuts are, and I will eat them and love them, and I'll get obsessed with them. And if I had my way, it would be all I'd eat. So I used to be obsessed with things like sugar, and I have gradually weaned myself to at least be obsessed with healthier things. But what I found helpful is a gadget that I have. It's called the Kitchen Safe, and if you just if you just Google Kitchen Safe, you'll find it. But it's a great little gadget where it just is a Tupperware container with a timer and a lock on it, and I literally have to lock away whatever my favorite treat of the month is. After I take out as much as I plan to eat that day, I have to lock the rest away for 24 hours because I can't be trusted with it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is...
What about you, Linda? What's your eating habit?
Well, I'm going to try this full week educating my taste buds. I'll tell you in the new year. But it's been great having you on the show. We will have you back again. It's food for thought, and you have taught us so much. Really, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Linda, because without you, I would not know about LDN, and I wouldn't be standing here today. So deep, deep gratitude.
Okay, thank you, Jill. The LDN Research Trust has an LDN Vimeo channel. I have interviewed over 550 LDN prescribers, researchers, pharmacists and patients from around the world for many conditions. You can find the link on the LDN Research Trust website. If you'd like to be interviewed sharing your experience, please email me, linda@ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you.